across Diogenes of Sinop, but this is Sinop. And Diogenes of Sinop, we all know the story about him living in a barrel and about complaining to Alexander the Great about Alexander standing in the sunlight. But he's also somebody who apparently, when asked to do something that he didn't want to do, stuck up his middle finger and said, "This is for you." So Diogenes of Sinop is the original version of Andrea Jenkyns, the MP who today during the local elections wants to become the Lincolnshire mayor. She is a reform candidate, and she's the lady who once wore a bright yellow dress and stuck a finger up at the journalists and the public. And I suppose that's what she's continuing to do now that she's defected from the Conservatives. And she's become a reform candidate and now has been elected to mayoral office. But the first person who stuck his finger up at the world was Diogenes of Sinop. And I must say, although it's an interesting place, and there's look, it's here, if you just look behind me here, there's a little bit of Byzantine magnificence, but there's not very much left of the original Greek city that was quite so famous here. Little bits of it exist. I was in an apartment shortly. We looked out of the window, and somebody had been trying to build an apartment opposite, a block of flats opposite, and they'd come across a pile of old stones. Well, they were quite clearly Greek columns and Roman columns. And just down the road is Pompeiopolis, which is one of the cities of Rome, and not very much of that exists now either. There's a colonnaded street, but I think Sinop for me is all about the middle finger. I am greatly entertained by that. If you were to walk through Sinop, I suppose, in the past, or even modern Athens, and you saw a man living in a barrel, mocking politicians, sneering at wealth and claiming to search by lamplight for an honest man, you'd likely think he'd escaped from a performance art piece or a loony bin, and you'd be right, because Diogenes of Sinop was in many ways the first anarchist, the first performance artist, and maybe the first influencer whose message was himself. Diogenes, I think, is relevant today, not because of what he owned or published, but because of what he rejected. And he took one look at the growing wealth and the status obsession in Athens, and they spat at it, sometimes quite literally. He dismissed fame, money, beauty, power with theatrical disdain. When Alexander the Great, the most powerful man on earth, stood before him and asked him if he wanted anything, Diogenes merely said, "Yes, get out of my sunlight." And that's not just cheek, it's a political statement. We are today submerged in hierarchies of fame, social capital, brand loyalty, and status games, and Diogenes shredded those games with ridicule. His entire life was subversion. He lived what he preached, free from possessions, unbothered by social norms, even urinating or defecating in public to expose the absurdity of artificial shame. As a result, he became the prophet of authenticity in an age of performance and moral clarity in a time of noise. But there's more. Diogenes wasn't just criticizing the rich, he was criticizing hypocrisy from anyone and everyone. He was indiscriminate in his contempt. Whether you were a politician, a philosopher, a prostitute, or a beggar, if you were dishonest or unvirtuous, he would roast you with the same vigor. His true loyalty was to virtue, not power. And in this sense, he wasn't misanthropic. He was a disappointed idealist, someone who believed human beings could be better if they stopped pretending. And then there's this. Diogenes was his own message. He didn't write down theories, he was the theory. Radical self-sufficiency, radical candor, radical resistance, radical smell. He turned his body into a philosophy, like performance artists do today. And in our time of curated identities, avatars and influences, Diogenes would say, "You want truth? Stop tweeting and start living it." Diogenes isn't a footnote in philosophy. He's a mirror held up to society and to us, and he reminds us that civilization is often built on illusions, and the only way to cut through that pretense is through laughter, provocation, and a refusal to be tamed. In a world that rewards conformity and punishes dissent,
Diogenes still snarls from the street corner, "You are the fools, not I." And perhaps, just perhaps, he's right.